let's talk Severance. So, Severance is a psychological sci-fi series on Apple TV centered around Lumon Industries, where the employees agree to a controversial medical procedure that separates their consciousness. When the severed employee starts the job, they have no recollection of prior memories or who they are, and once they clock out for the day, they have no memory of what they do at work. The new identity that is birthed by erasing that person's memories is referred as an innie. And the person who exists outside of the job, who agreed to sever their mind, is referred as the outie. First, I want to acknowledge the main theme of the show, which is corporate exploitation. I read a Reddit post that described it as satire for big corporations. For example, how repetitive, boring, and robotic the work routine can feel in a corporate job. The innie versus outie self can symbolize how different people are at work from how they are outside of work, and the way jobs can strip one of their own identity with the cryptic corporate dialect. The show does an amazing portrayal of the awkward tension that comes with forced small talk amongst coworkers or the fake laughs at corny jokes told, as it metaphorically explores the dynamics of office culture. The waffle party is comparable to the pizza parties we often joke around about online, which is generally given to staff after they've made quota. The finger traps and other desk gadgets are given as an incentive to represent how far they've gotten in the file. The "we're like a family" cult-like quote you get from companies to rationalize seeing your workers more than your actual family. Throughout the first season, we see there is a heavy focus on Mark. Whatever it is Lumon Industries wants to accomplish, he seems of importance, as Colbell, the floor manager, was living right next to him and spying on him. They tried to state that she had a erotic fixation on him, but clearly there's more going on here, as he is the only one who has that glass piece with his face on it, and the fact that he keeps breaking rules and making requests with little to no consequences. So what do we know about Mark? We know he agreed to be severed because he was going through an emotional traumatic experience of losing his wife in a car accident. He states that he can't deal with the pain, so he took the job as an escape from his trauma because he forgets that she even existed for most of the day. In season 2, it was stated that he was needed for Cold Harbor, a project that seems to involve his wife, that was believed to be dead. However, she is a therapist on the severed floor, but then she was let go. We can see that this severance procedure is extremely controversial because if the outie version decides to quit, that would technically mean that the innie no longer exists. And then we have MDR, which is macro data refinement. And that is the department that Mark works in along with Helly, Dylan, and Irving. They refine numbers and place scary looking numbers or numbers that intuitively stand out. And then they would collect those numbers and then place them into one of the 5 virtual bins. I want to get into the concept of the OTC, the overtime contingency, which temporarily allows the innie to take over the outie's body after the workday has already ended. We first see Dylan experience this, and his kid gives him a hug, which of course triggers him. This is what caused the entire team to revolt and eventually leads to the innies seeing the outside world in the first season. This is where we see Mark speak to his sister and her husband about his book, The You Are, which ended up on the severed floor and also played a part in inspiring the innies to find out more about the outside world. This is where we find out that Helly R, the innie to Helena, is Helena Egan, who is the current CEO's daughter. She finds herself at a gala for Lumon Industries. So we are starting to see more of Helena Egan in this second season, and we can see she's being groomed to eventually be a CEO herself. I believe the idea here is that this controversial procedure may sway some criticism if they see that the CEO was also willing to undergo the procedure herself. But Helly, who is a badass, at the Lumon Gala decides to tell everyone, "I'm an innie. Everything they tell you about severance is a lie. We're not happy. We're miserable. They torture us down there. We're prisoners. This was really interesting because earlier in the season, Cobell states the surest way to tame a prisoner is to let him believe he's free. That quote was so significant because not only does it speak to the idea of taming tempers, but it also speaks to the fact that they are trapped like prisoners. Technically, the innies are a separate consciousness in a way, and they did not agree to take the job, and they don't even have the power to leave. The outies do, which is very convenient for them as they aren't the ones doing the actual work. Quick, I do want to point out there is something very weird about the town. Very dark, ominous, eerie, because for one, the cars are like super old. There doesn't seem to be like many people. I don't know. I just feel like maybe this experiment expands out to the entire town somehow. There is a theory that the employees are in a simulation, and I already know people aren't going to like that one. But what I did find really, really interesting is that Keanu Reeves from The Matrix is the voice of the Lumon building. In the second season, they showed the innies a video of an animated building that is the Lumon building. And I just find it very intentional that they would use Neo from The Matrix to specifically be the voice of the building. I mean, they could have had anybody do that. The board can be assembled for a meeting at basically any moment, and how is that possible? Theory basically suggests that the board could be short for motherboard. So now I am reading a Reddit theory, and I'm reading it directly off of Reddit. But here it states, while watching Severance, I kept hearing the term MDR, macro data refinement, the department where employees analyze data based on the emotions it triggers. Something about it felt strangely familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Then I saw how it worked. Employees scan through numbers on a screen and must fill which ones seem wrong or evoke certain emotions. That immediately reminded me of something I've experienced in therapy. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. EMDR is a psychotherapeutic technique used to process trauma. It works by guiding the patient through traumatic memories while stimulating eye movements or other bilateral sensory input. The idea is that certain visual stimuli can activate the brain's memory networks, allowing it to reprocess experiences that are otherwise stuck. And that's where the connection to Severance comes in. In MDR, employees don't consciously understand what they're analyzing, but rely on a gut feeling to detect anomalies. In EMDR, patients don't analyze their trauma logically, but instead allow the brain to reprocess it while following visual stimuli. In both cases, there's an interaction between visual perception and emotional response. Bypassing rational analysis, the brain processes information in a non-traditional way, whether it's trauma in therapy or incomprehensible data in Severance. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but the similarity between MDR and EMDR really stood out to me. I will give the season finale specifically a 9.5 out of 10, and that 0.5 is only because we still don't know what the hell is going on with those damn goats. Innie Mark versus Outie Mark arguing back and forth through video was very satisfying to see, I must say. And then also the Gemma thing, it's an interesting layer to it because to the Outie Mark, Gemma is Gemma, but to the Innie Mark, she's Miss Casey. So he's like telling him like, yeah, we've got to save her. But then Innie Mark is like, okay, but what will happen to the rest of us? What will happen to Innie Helly, Dylan, and me? Because all of our lives kind of depend on the work that we do at Lumon. And I liked that. I liked that Innie Mark wanted to help Outie Mark with Gemma / Miss Casey, but on the other hand, he wants to look out for his friends. And that's an interesting dynamic because we all know as the viewer that this whole plan is most likely going to lead to Mark getting fired. And he probably will. We'll see just how important he actually is to Lumon. But that would ultimately mean that Innie Mark is dead. And Innie Mark is like, wait, no, what about me? what makes your life more important than mine? And this is the most interesting element of Severance, because these innies, they have their own separate consciousness and their own lives, and they're people too, right? So in a way, they are fighting for their souls. The whole show is technically based around Innie Mark and the entire experiment that Lumon is conducting. However, Outie Mark was the primary one who made the decision for Innie Mark to exist, and there is no Innie Mark without Outie Mark. And with other movies and TV shows where the villain is very clear and you know who you're rooting for, Severance has an interesting dynamic, because during the season finale, I really didn't know who I was rooting for, or if I was even rooting for anyone in particular, because both Marks are the same person. So when Mark did what he did at the end, it wasn't like, oh damn, Mark didn't get to go live his life with Gemma, because how does the show even continue if that happens? After seeing all those experiments and those different rooms they were conducting with Gemma, I just know. Whatever they are doing with those goats is no good. No fucking good. I am so thankful that a show like Severance exists, because it truly is different from any other show that I've ever seen, and it influences me to think about how surreal it is and all of its weirdness and awkwardness and how that applies to my life. And it's honestly disturbing, but that's what I like about it. Severance will probably go down as one of the best TV series ever. You are so entrapped and intrigued as a viewer in this world of Lumon that you feel like you have to know what the fuck they're up to.